Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. So being from England, when you got here to Korea, how much did you get that whole 영국 신사 thing, English gentleman? Have you been called a gentleman much?
Yeah, it's a big thing. It's still pretty much the overwhelming image of the English people. The American culture here is pretty dominant, as you can see just walking around Seoul. You've got the Starbucks clones, the clothes, the culture, people going off to, the Koreatown in LA. But when it comes to Britain, it's pretty much, it's bowler hats, people marching across Waterloo Bridge. And Harry Potter, I suppose, is kind of creeping in, but that's still sort of schoolboys and shorts and all that kind of thing. And then you've got, I suppose there's James Bond still, but that's pretty much as, it's certainly a...
Broad strokes.
Yeah. So people are kind of they're interested about what really goes on in England, because they, as opposed to people who've actually been there, as I was saying when we met, there's a lot of calls for the teaching jobs here for the American accent. So that's the North American accent pretty much reigns supreme, and I get the impression they think the British accent is radically different, and they won't be able to understand a word if someone from Britain or the UK just opens their mouth. So that is perception, and it's interesting. Where I live at the moment is up in the suburbs in the north of Seoul, and it's still a place where they really aren't any Western people at all. So you get the looks, the raised eyebrows, the people talking to you, and the typical thing is either they presume you're American if you're walking around here, or it's certainly where I am, which is near the army bases. One of them was originally the setting for MASH, the TV series. So obviously they didn't film it there, but that's where it was supposed to be. And there are army bases up there, so they tend to think you're possibly a soldier. I mean, looking at my build, you probably would be surprised, but some people have actually said to my wife, "Oh, is your husband in the armed forces?" And I say no. And the other thing, I suppose, is in the area called Itaewon, which is central of Seoul in the west, where you've got the Yongsan military garrison is the other place for the expatriates to sort of hang out. But in other places in Seoul, you can quite happily walk around for hours on end and not really see anybody that isn't from Korea, or certainly from Japan or China. And in terms of the other perceptions of British people or American people, I think there's an idea that we're all incredibly promiscuous, that we're just constantly just sleeping with everybody we meet, and that's what we've been doing that seems to be the similar observation or idea for a lot of Western people, that we're just constantly having sex with everybody we've met, and it's only a matter of days before we sort of jump into bed, or sort of hours before we jump into bed with the next person we meet.
Got to keep your eye on these foreigners, so you never know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not it's not that it's anything pretty much like hostile, and it's as people. I said, I think that the expatriate population in general, not just English teachers, is about slightly under 3%. So you're still in a country where the vast majority of people are Korean. And it's pretty understandable that they're suspicious of a lot of people who aren't Korean, because of the history they've been through. I mean, a lot of them went to the United States or travel, but pick a country and they've probably given Korea a hard time. So it's kind of understandable in a way.
This is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, coming to you from Gangnam, Seoul, Korea, speaking with Laurence Pritchard, writer, teacher, sometimes stage actor, and English gentleman. What is the behavior expected of an Englishman here? I think a lot about what behavior is expected of an American, what they expect us to be like. What do they expect Englishmen to be like if they don't have bowler hats?
I would expect it's the opening doors, holding open doors, being sort of generally polite. Seoul is a city where you don't really see that at all because everybody is in a rush all the time. If people think that London or New York are busy, then you've got another thing coming when you come here. There's this expression pali pali, if I pronounce that right, and it basically means come on, hurry up, hurry up. You hear that all the time. You hear that in the morning. If I'm on the trains at 6:30 a.m., there are people just running to get the trains, even out of my building, even more elderly people who clearly are retired. They see the train come, they're running to get that train. They're running to get into the train, they're running off it. So I suppose there's sort of an idea they're a bit more sort of standoffish, that we're a bit more relaxed in that sense. But as for other perceptions, I suppose they do expect us to be similar to Americans in a lot of other ways. So I don't know how many differences they really do see in that sense. So
they have a certain idea of England, and they also have a certain idea of France. I mean, you've worked in France, you've lived in France, you met your Korean wife in France, you've seen this chain Paris Baguette, Paribas for short. That reflects a certain idea of what France is to the Korean. What is that idea? What is the France of the imagination for Koreans? How does it compare to the real thing, you think?
I suppose it's one of luxury goods, of high fashion, of sophisticated people, sophisticated, expensive, extravagant clothes. If you watch any of the Korean dramas, it's almost a symbol of sophistication here is that boss swinging, or perhaps not swinging, but swirling that large glass of red wine. That is almost a kind of
semiotic sort of indicator of...
It's an indicator. The wine glass has to be unusually big. It's the biggest wine glass you can possibly get. And they're swirling the red wine in there. And I think the most expensive restaurant in Seoul is actually the Pierre Gagnère, French restaurant, of course, which is probably... I think you can get away with easily spending $400, $500 there. So it doesn't really compete with anything in Seoul. So that is certainly the idea there of one. It was a typical French, I suppose, the French image abroad of one of sort of sophistication, elegance, and
the brand has held up.
The brand works. I mean, as you say, you've got Paris Baguette here, you've got Tous les Jours, and you've got I think there's another French bakery, and you walk in and you're getting. I got an almond croissant in Gangnam the other day. You can buy baguettes, of course. So
how does it compare to what you ate in France?
The almond croissant wasn't that great. In fact, it was pretty dry, pretty crisp. It hasn't got that really warm, buttery feeling that you get in really good croissants
reminiscent of my ongoing search for Mexican food here. It's never quite right, but I'm getting some hits rather than misses lately.
It's not that bad. When I came here 6 or 7 years ago, to be honest with you, the bread was a disaster. It was so weird. It was just this sort of sweet, soft, milky bread that was just insipid and tasteless. And they still put kind of weird things in. They'll get a donut and kind of put a hot dog in the middle, or put garlic in a pan au chocolat or something. And there's another thing of tending to make things that are savory sweet. Another thing, they'll do a sort of sausage roll kind of thing.
That sounds okay to me, but the English do not like to mix savory and sweet, right? The idea of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is repulsive to you, is it not?
It would be an outrage. Yeah, it really.
To me, it is the only staple there is.
It's a sort of. absolutely not doesn't happen. There's something they do here is when they drink beer, they have fruit, which is to me just doesn't make sense. I mean, beer and savory snacks it just makes perfect sense to me. Rather than having watermelon or apples or oranges with beer, I mean, it's sweet things with sweet things as well. So that's something they love to do. And they will actually bring out this vast bowl of chopped watermelon or whatever to have with the beers.
And before meeting your Korean wife in Paris, as I say, did you have much exposure to Korean culture?
To be honest with you, not a lot. It was pretty much the films was the first thing.
As it was for me too.
Yeah, the films, the Park Chan-wook, the Old Boy, the trilogy there, the Bong Joon-ho, the host at the time, and Memories of Murder was probably the first thing that I saw. And apart from that, I don't really know anything much more. And what was interesting about seeing particularly Memories of Murder and all those films was the way they combine lots of different elements of genre that we are less likely to do certainly in Britain, certainly in Hollywood.
Yes,
what I mean by
about that.
Yeah, what I mean by that is they will take a film which is clearly a genre film, like a massive monster in the middle of the Han River, but they will also
one famous example.
Yeah, they will also put in like the social aspect, the sort of an international aspect. There'll be sort of the symbolism of the American influence, for better or for worse, in the United States. And I'm not saying that genre films never do that, but there's something I've noticed in a lot of the films. There'll be a real mix of styles. Sometimes there'll be comedy and serious comment, and then suddenly very violent films. And the hero which is almost always compromised. It's never a 100% good guy, or it's always something that's not quite, fitting right with the hero. They don't really emerge sort of guns blazing. It's not really a culture where they save the world. And this is a similar thing in a lot of the books the translated literature I've been reading recently. Yeah, there's a protagonist there. They might, do the job, get the girl, but it really is an idea that isn't that individual saving the world or saving the day.
Yes, I've talked to certain Westerners about this, and some will like this aspect of Korean literature or any kind of story. Some will dislike it, but it seems viewers here prefer seeing themselves reflected rather than seeing an exceptional person. And do you get that sense?
Yes, I think I can give an example of what almost all the books I've been reading, and one of the things I think is difficult to understand is this idea which they explain. To take an example, this novel, The Poet, by Lee Mun-yeol.
One of the better-known Korean novels in English.
This was one that was translated relatively earlier to the recent ones. I mean, this is an excellent book, translated by Chung-hee Chung and brother Anthony of Taizé, and they explain in the introduction there's this Korean idea of this called Han, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and this is an idea of intense unhappiness, frustration at past wrongs that cannot maybe ever be really avenged or. It's certainly a melancholy idea. It's an idea that life is difficult. It's a struggle. And this really goes through pretty much all the books. I mean, it's not to say that
just as the Han River goes through Seoul.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's not to say they're massively depressing, but this idea, I think, I was even reading into with the incredibly fashionable Korean-American chef David Chang, and he was talking about this as well. And he was saying this is so struggle that nothing's ever really going to be that great, or they, I mean, it's impossible for certainly from Britain or the West to really understand what this country has been to in the 20th century. Really terrible history of both colonization, civil war, military rule, and now you've got this sort of slowdown of the economy, and that's something which isn't really gonna. If you had a hero in a book or a movie that was 100% great, I think Korean people would think it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, this is completely crazy.
North Korean movies have that, not South Korean ones.
Yeah, I have actually seen a North Korean movie. It was a kind of tale of, you know, this village that was invaded by another village, and was a symbol of imperial and invading the good, honest workers, and contained a monster as well. It was sort of this small kind of Godzilla character. Not quite sure. I don't remember exactly how that.
Pulgasari?
Yeah, that was here. I'm not sure how he fitted into everything. But that's another thing as well. A lot of these books, another collection of stories. Jung Mi-kyung, My Son's Girlfriend. This is part of the Dalkey Archive, this recent Library of Korean Literature, which they brought out, which is a lot more of the most recent books that they're translating. They've already done 10. I think they're going to do another 10 or even 15 more. And this is an really interesting short story collection, because the author really deals with very modern situations of class, which one thing when you get to Korea, first of all, you don't really notice those class divisions.
Compared to England.
Compared to England, where sort of people almost wear them on their sleeves and with accents and.
You notice it more than I do when I'm there.
Well, you do. You have the accent thing. I mean, you have this obsession with class that hasn't. We like to think it had gone away in the 90s, but it really sort of resurged now. And I think from a country in Korea that really was pretty much sort of wiped off the face of the map, and then has come back from nothing. You tend to think that class distinctions aren't that important, but now certainly with the Gangnam, the rise of Gangnam, and from what people tell me, it is becoming more important, certainly with jobs. And a candidate for a job will be asked about their background. They will be asked about their family. What did your father do? What does your brother do? Something my wife said is quite common. And some of my students argue that that's a sort of, checking whether you have the right sort of mettle to be a, sales representative, or you're tough enough. But there's certainly a class distinctions, class element there. One of the stories in My Son's Girlfriend is about a relatively wealthy. The title of the story is about a relatively wealthy woman in Gangnam who is concerned that her son is going out with someone from a relatively poor background, and even though
concern in stories here,
even though they meet up and they kind of get on, there's still that lurking idea that this is not really the done thing, that this isn't really going to happen. And people are, you see this a lot in society. Kim Young-ha is one of the authors here, a great novella, or short novel, I Have the Right to Destroy Myself. He mentioned in the New York Times article that there's also the generation gap, which is a big thing, because with this Confucian idea that the elderly, the parents, are highly respected, there's the whole idea revolves around this, that a lot of them thought, the generation before thought that their kids would take care of them, so they didn't need to get a pension. So, not a problem, kids will respect us, they'll sort us out. But the problem's been that with the downturn in the economy, the kids have said, well, sorry, Mum, sorry, now we've actually got any money, or we're actually looking for a job.
Yes, we'd like some cash ourselves, please.
Yeah. So you get this resentment, which plays itself out on the underground system, the subway system, where you've got these seats which are reserved for the elderly passengers. And woe betide if you sit in one of those seats, or if someone is from another country and they're pretty sternly told that, hey, come on, clear on out. This is for us, And there was a story in Busan where a fight broke out because someone was sitting in the seats, a Korean gentleman who was 55, and he was considered too young for the seats. A fight broke out. he actually rolled up a piece of paper and set it on fire and threw it into the train on his way out. So they called the cops, and it's really quite remarkable sort of
see that on the tube.
scenario. I wouldn't know. Inconceivable in the tube in London. And another thing is of course, the elderly people travel free, and you use
none of them pay.
Over 65, I think, is free. So they use the subway system to the fullest possible extent. So even if you're on the subway at, say, 6 a.m., sometimes I start pretty early, or 5:50, they'll be on there probably going off to see their friends, or probably off getting an early start. It doesn't make you think that, they must be getting up at 5:30. I don't think hopefully won't be doing that. Late 70s, sort of.
To get a good deal on the subway, make sure you've used it a lot.
Setting the alarm at 5 a.m. and sort of, and the other thing is they will get off the train and they will burst off the train and they will be sort of jogging down the steps to get the connection and rushing into the next train. So they're pretty eager. They're not just sort of strolling about. And you see that. You really do see that difference in, the generation gap. I mean, one of the things that Korean people are surprised about when they visit other countries or particularly Britain, America, is how we refer to people older. Like we will using first names or speaking in a relatively informal manner, and that really surprises them, or surprises even sort of shocks them. They don't understand that. I would say a lot of people in Britain now, I presume in the States, if they're early 60s, they don't really consider themselves to be that old. And if you start sort of using honorifics and sort of almost like they would be quite, I think they'd be quite offended that that you were suddenly treating them like some old fuddy-duddy sort of who needed some special attention. And also in Britain, they're the people with all the money, the baby boomers. So they're kind of zooming off on holiday, on vacation. So they're not really a massive cause for concern.
How did the decision come about to actually move to Korea, to live in Korea?
Well, I was living in Paris, and I met my wife in Paris. This was eight years ago. And we met through friends. And that was really we'd always planned to come here. And we had our daughter was born in Paris, and then we came to live here. So this is why we live right up in the northern suburbs, and where my wife's parents live. And so we've been here just about a year and a half now.
Now, was this an idea always palatable to you? That, fine, yeah, we can move to Korea? Or was it something that you had to sort of come to a conclusion about over time?
No, I didn't really hesitate. I think it's probably the job I do can be pretty frustrating in the terms of it's pretty ad hoc. You don't really know what you're doing in the next month and the month after that, and it's pretty chaotic. But then again, it's just so adaptable. You can just go to another country and you're kind of up and running as an English teacher. You can, pretty much go anywhere. Well, not anywhere. I mean, as long as they can pay you enough. And certainly what is, or what has been desirable here is the difference between you get a reasonably good salary and the standard of living is still relatively low. I mean, Seoul, a lot of people think, Gangnam is expensive, but generally speaking, Seoul's not that expensive. It's certainly cheaper than Tokyo.
Oh, it's cheaper, certainly.
Yeah. I think that probably, maybe I was a little bit too relaxed, because I think when I got here, I visited me here before, but you don't get quite how strict the hierarchy is. It's strict between, in terms of the sexes, in terms of age, in terms of the behavior of the people at work. What I mean by that is this really tough pyramid structure, no messing around. The boss is the boss. You don't agree at all, which is something that is in the. It's in the culture. A lot of the books here. I have a right to destroy myself. You've got two brothers. The older brother called C, the younger brother. They come to blows, in terms of what is expected of the older brother and the younger brother. There's in the Vegetarian by Han Kang, great book coming out soon, translated by Deborah Smith. That is the two sisters. This is a novel about a woman who decides to become a vegetarian, and then goes on to sort of decide not to eat at all. And there you see the conflicts between the brothers and the sisters. It's not that doesn't exist in other cultures, but it's really pronounced. I mean, in Korean people, they will, if someone is even slightly older, they will use an honorific term. It's translated in the Guest, another book, Hwan Sok-kyung, by Big Brother. This is two brothers again. One of them is, well, they're both, I think, they're reverends. They're living in the United States. And the older brother dies at the beginning of the novel, and the younger brother goes back to Korea and investigates what happened in the Korean War and what the older brother got up to, which is, as you learn at the end, is pretty unsavory stuff. So that again is the older and the younger brother. And this idea that translates, I would say, into, as I said, the working environment, this conglomerate. So you've got Samsung, LG, Hyundai. It's all the families at the top, and the male successor, of course. Still very incredibly patriarchal society. I think Korean men do the least amount of work in the home of any relatively developed nation, and it's still a pretty macho place. I mean, it's not that people don't realize that, or they don't think it's necessarily a great thing, but it's that safe to say that that's pretty much in control. There's society's, get the impression, is really dominated by the conglomerates. They're really running the show, I think. This current government is, after the seawall, tragedy, disaster, considered like pretty useless. But I think the people running Samsung, LG, calling the shots. They're the big guys.
It's not the president; it's the president of Samsung who's running things.
I think that's the case. I mean, what happened in the after the Korean War was that the dictator at the time, who's the father of the current president, pretty much said to the conglomerates that were, of course, emerging at the time, he pretty much told them what to do. And said, well, look, what do you
build ships?
Yeah, build ships. Well, what are you making that for? Build cars, build motorbikes, I think the Samsung founder was more instrumental in saying, well, we're going to make technology a bit like, Japan. People were a bit suspicious of this, and obviously that came good. So he was someone, the dictator said to these people, like, just do it. And they pretty much built the country. I mean, it's this amazing work ethic that they've still got. That is just working day in, day out. That is unquestionably something that people are not happy with now. I mean, obviously at the time it was something they had to do. And now if you speak to anybody, one thing that isn't a misconception about Korea is the sheer amount of hours they put in. And as I was saying earlier when we met, I've been offered work that starts at 7 a.m., 6:50 a.m. This is, of course, before...
Get there at that time.
You get there at that time, or if you're teaching executive, you get there 15 minutes before, because they're not going to be happy.
As an executive, after all.
Yeah, and then they...
top of the pyramid.
And you teach these guys that, and of course it's not just that, they're hungover. They've been out drinking the night before. They drink, people who don't know what soju is. Soju is a Korean liquor. It's 19%, I think, alcohol. They stick it in beer, which is what they call a somek.
It's nearly free of the stuff. It's so cheap.
It's so cheap. you can neck one of those bottles in a matter of minutes, and you're out of you're really out of your face. It's they stick it in beer. It's called somek, which is soju is the Korean for beer, and mekju is Korean for beer, and soju. They stick it in that, and that's just lethal. And I mean, English people
go everywhere.
Old and young, you see the older guys like just sitting in these cafes or sitting outside 7-Eleven. That's an interesting thing here. You can actually go into a 7-Eleven, get a few cans of beer, a couple of bottles of soju. You can just sit outside in the street.
In the States, inconceivable. Absolutely. In the States. In Britain, you could do it.
In Britain, it would be chaos.
But you could legally do it. Like, you could go drink outside, right?
In Britain?
Can you?
You can... In terms of walking around the street and drinking beer, I think it depends on the area. What we call, you can't do it in where you buy beer, which is what we call an off license, which I think is called a liquor store, and that's because they have a license to sell alcohol, but they don't have a license for you to drink it on the premises. So in that sense, no. And certainly it would just be the idea of just going to an off license place and grabbing a couple of cans and then just sort of sitting outside on a bench. I mean, people would just first of all think you're an alcoholic. But
socially unacceptable, but would you get arrested for it? In the States, you might get picked up for it.
You would get arrested for it if if it was a particular town where they had a lot of problems with that. People might call the police, and if you were being particularly abusive or something in your home, we have what is called an ASBO.
Yes.
Which is the Antisocial Behavioural Order. Title of a recent Martin Amis novel, I think.
ASBO, yeah.
So you might get an ASBO, which it just seems to be a sort of badge of honour for some people. You know, they rack them up.
They wear them like a general's stripes.
Yeah, but even that, I think certainly drinking cans outside and off places in England, even that will be frowned upon. I mean, the original idea of a pub in England wasn't actually to get, people don't believe me when they say this, wasn't actually to get drunk. It was to have a few, quiet beers in an atmosphere that was a bit like someone's home. An English beer ale, which is now incredibly fashionable. You've got this sort of craft beer. It's now called craft beer. It wasn't particularly strong. I mean, people would be... the original idea was that people made, way back, hundreds of years back, people made beer in their house. And then you would invite your local village in, and I suppose you'd say, well, if I give you a few free beers, give us a sort of chicken or something, or look after the dog or whatever. And of course the kings got to hear about this and thought, we can't have this. Let's tax them. So this became the public house or the pub. So this is why in England they resemble people's houses. It's because that's what they originally were. So, and the idea is that everybody's equal. You have a few beers. You don't get too rowdy. I mean, now of course that's been replaced with the bar. And but even now in London, I mean, people go out and drink beer. People go out and drink here in soju.
Straight to hard alcohol.
They go straight to the hard stuff. And it's amazing. You see actually people who've fallen down the escalators, and you've got these big escalators here.
Some of these stations, that could kill you.
Oof. I saw a guy the other day. He really didn't look in good shape. He'd clearly fallen down the escalator. There were some medics attending to him. And I've seen a couple of the people with bandages over their noses and on their foreheads. And I think this is the thing of getting onto the escalator and if you try to negotiate an escalator after a few beers, it's not that difficult. If you try to negotiate an escalator after drinking several bottles of soju, I'm actually surprised it doesn't happen more often.
Yes,
but
it's either bandages from that, you see, or plastic surgery bandages. Those are the two kinds of bandages.
Do you see that? Yeah. The most remarkable story I had recently was, if I think it's true, or even if it's not true, it's a good story.
Grain of salt.
Yeah. I think it was around here, because we're in Gangnam now, and it was the plastic surgery clinic had put in a big sort of glass cylinder all the removed chin bones from the surgery. They put them in this tower. So the tower of chin bones appeared outside this clinic, and they were quickly asked to remove it. It's got an amazing sight, must have been. I wish I'd seen it.
Is that one of the main surgeries, chin reduction? Must be.
The idea is the standard of beauty is one of the things is that they don't like that the head or the face to be too big. So having a small
face things.
Yeah, small face, and its eyes, it's the nose. So it's pretty much everything. It's I'm not sure what the statistics are, but it's a lot of people do it. I mean, it's all it's really not that unusual.
Yes, seemingly. I mean, I heard so much about the plastic surgery here before I came. I thought I knew what to expect, but then I walked down the street for a coffee the first morning I was here, and I passed the first 4 coffee shops were actually inside plastic surgery clinics. So I passed those up, and I was thinking, wow, I really had no idea how popular it truly is. I mean, you don't see that anywhere in London, I don't think.
No, there are a couple, and there's talk of people, now in London, like popping off in the lunch break for sort of a quick, nose job. That kind of coming back, but not to the extent here. I think it's partly to do with the highly competitive nature of the society now. It's a very, very visual. I mean, I work at companies now where people are really well dressed. They're walking around in really pretty expensive clothes. The men and the women. And certainly a couple of companies are working out. It's young and above averagely attractive as well. I mean, and that image is really important. That one of the observations, going back to say about British people, or certainly people in Europe, that people have, is that they don't understand the hipster or the bohemian idea. They really don't get that, because if they see that, they just think the people are poor.
Yeah.
The
hipsters are big where I come from.
Absolutely, and it's big in London now. And Koreans will see that, and they will see the guy in the sort of the ironic T-shirt, the admittedly expensive, but perhaps a bit scruffy jeans. They will see the sort of the hair and the stubble or whatever, and they will think, well, that guy's down on his luck. That guy or that he must be having a hard time.
Should I give him money? Does he need lunch?
Yeah. And that's something which is really difficult to explain. It's really difficult to explain that.
What states he has more money?
And in London they have more money, particularly because if you've got the option to look like that, you've probably not got the straight 9-to-5 job.
Yeah.
So they don't really get that. I mean, of course, you can explain that. Well, this suggests that you're really highly creative and you don't really care about money and you're really original, but. You can explain that, but when you try to explain what they're actually interested in and why, and if you explain that, they're either really into kind of incredibly obscure things, or they're into incredibly popular things, for a lot of the time, really arbitrary reasons, and they're into sort of Nigerian funk, Colombian death metal, and Vietnamese rap or something, and they still don't get it. You don't really see it here. You see the occasional thing with people, maybe the guys with a moustache and maybe a few tattoos and maybe a funny hat. But that's pretty much as far as it goes. But they don't. It's the subculture as well. You don't even. It's not. They're not big on subcultures. I mean,
irony's not quite here yet, is it?
Oh, God, I hope I don't have to explain that. I mean, ironically liking something, that sort of thing, the retro thing is, because they think, well, why? I mean, why would you have something that's sort of, I mean, of course they get the idea of sort of reissuing, the Stan Smith Adidas, of course, but the retro thing, they don't get.
Nothing's old and therefore bad.
Yeah, I mean, why would you want to have something like that? And I suppose also, why on earth would you want to do that? So that's interesting as well. Another difficult thing to explain, the idea that in Europe and the West that people don't really take care of their appearance, that they're not so well dressed and don't smart themselves up as much as the people do here.
How important has, I look at the stack of novels here on the table, how important has literature been as a way for you to sort of come to grips with Korean culture as a whole?
I think it's been really important because one thing, it's almost the work of an expatriate here is I find that people are constantly trying to convince you that they know more about the culture than you do. I mean, if that sounds cynical, maybe it is, but there's certainly a grain of truth in saying that people are either trying to impress you with their language or impress you like where they've been, or people are writing blogs now.
Other expats or Koreans or
other expats. There's a great bit in a novel recent one by Ben Lerner where he's in the narrator's in Spain and he goes up into this with his Spanish girlfriend to this sort of hilltop restaurant, and he's absolutely mortified to find that there's another American guy there, and he thought, I've really thought I'd found this sort of niche. And so you get that, and also you get the question of like, well, how do you really get to know the culture? I mean, of course, like my wife's Korean. I mean, I read stuff, I listen to people, I speak a bit of the language, and I thought, well, one way is to really read the literature, read the people who hopefully don't know what's going on, and from that you've got an interesting idea which you probably wouldn't get just by living here, is a really example of people being really disconnected. In fact, really not people connecting in the Kim Young-ha book. You've got these brothers. One of them is an artist. Something that video art tends to crop up in this book. Also in the Vegetarian, there's a couple of artists in My Son's Girlfriend, and also the idea that things are being mediatized, we're receiving experience through the 24-hour news, which isn't a thing that's particular to Korea. There's certainly an idea of people disconnected, of people really losing something. This is in the bestseller, the Korean bestseller, this book, Please Look After My Shin Kyun-suk. This is a story about this elderly woman who gets lost in the Seoul subway station, and it's really again, it's going back to that loss of the respect, loss of connection with the parents, with the ancestors. I mean, people say that Korea's now become this really materialistic society, but yes, it has. But at the same time, they will have these days. New Year's Day is a particular day when they, you remember your ancestors. There's particular food that they eat, and another day, I think, when they go off to visit the ancestors, the graves, and there's certain things to eat. I mean, a student asked me, what do we do on New Year's Day in England? And I said, well, nothing really. We just sort of, recover from the day before. And do you eat anything particular? No. So there is still that there, But certainly a sense of sort of modernization, I think, a sense of which is in all the books. Some things have just happened too fast. If you go back 3 World Cups, 2002, people generally say that was a really positive time. That people were, on the up. Economy was, peaking up. It was democracy. Things are getting richer. Things are picking up. But now there's not so much of a positive feeling, to say the least. Things are slowing down. People, even voting for the daughter of a dictator, previous dictator, suggests that people almost missed something about the days before. There's something that the more elderly people will say something, they will say something like, well, there was less crime, or people respected the elderly people more. That's not an unreasonable thing to say. But then if I was reading that the 1962 South Korea GDP per capita was $104. Now it's $22,500. So that's going from 60 to the present day. That's a pretty big jump.
We mentioned this dictator Park Chung-hee who ordered Korea to modernize, essentially, in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, that range. Mostly the 70s, I think. Well, he died in the 70s, so he obviously didn't last enough to command the economy to grow more after his death, although, who knows, his daughter is in the Blue House today. But hear me out on this one, because it'll sound a little strange, but now I feel like among at least the not the oldest of the people in South Korea, there seems to be an attitude like a lot of the English have toward Margaret Thatcher, which is, sure, I hate him, I hate her, but what else were we going to do if the place was a wreck? Is it a similar attitude?
It's a really controversial line because it even actually extends back into the period of Japanese rule. There's even revisionist historians that say, well, even there were things there that were good. I mean, obviously that's I'm not really qualified to say much more about that, but certainly there was an idea that there was no choice. I mean, the way that Seoul, the whole place was flattened. And so
hard to overstate the extent of the destruction, and everywhere but Busan.
Yeah. I mean, so what you got now, I mean, there's a cliche in England to say, oh, this used to be sort of trees and fields, but where we are now, up until relatively recently, was trees and fields. Gangnam is south of the river.
It's literally a field.
Literally trees and fields. And the way it's just built up, it's still... It's part of this, this culture, this fast, bally, come on, work a lot. They didn't have any other choice. They didn't have... I was reading that during the Korean War, the Americans, even the American generals had to explain where Korea actually was. I mean, that's the extent to which they've come from. I mean, going back in history, I think in the early 20th century, the Korean delegation went to, I presume it would be in the League of Nations, and said, well, hang on, guys, we've been, colonized by Japan. Well, what can you do about this? They were practically laughed out of the building. He said, well, that's just what happens. I mean, Japan have done that. Well, we're not going to tell them to do. Well, we're all doing this. What are you talking about? They really did kind of, with no one else to turn to themselves. And you get this thing now where in Seoul, a restaurant or a bar is somehow not making the money. It's a matter of days. That place closes down. The workers move in. Literally a couple of days, you got a fried chicken restaurant, wallop, there.
Probably the default business, a fried chicken restaurant.
It's certainly where we live. I think there's 4 fried chicken restaurants, and 2 of them appeared in the last month. One appeared, I think, about a week after the other one, because the first one got a queue outside about 20 people. So they obviously thought, whoever's already thought, right, this is good business, let's build another one. And it just, something doesn't work, and they just, boom, change it immediately. I mean, but no, I think you're right. There really is a sense of, well, first of all, there's no other choice. And you've got to look back and find the good stuff, but you've got the positive elements, so they go completely crazy. But one of the novels, The Guest, which is the Hwang Suk-hyun, which I've mentioned briefly, this is about someone who is going back to into North Korea and attempting to find out what happened to his own family, and also reunite the 2 families. And one of the things they talk about in the book is that you had Christianity in North Korea. Of course, when it became communist, then that was the difference were magnified. And then also you've got the communist people in South Korea. And when that became a democracy, they were considered to be, traitors to the cause. So it wasn't just that the country was split. It was split along the lines of what your affiliations were, whether you were communist or Christian. This is also in the Poet, the Yuman Yeol book. That this is back in the 19th century, where the main character in question's grandfather's a governor, and the region that he's in is attacked by the rebels, taken over by the rebels, the king, and then the king takes back over control, and the grandfather is considered a traitor. And so this means that the poet, which is the grandson, has to sort of wander around, sometimes sort of denying his background, sometimes sort of kind of confessing it. So one minute he's doing this sort of, he tries to get back into society, tries to get back into high-level society. And this is very much, this actually will happen to similar thing happened to the author. He his father was, if I get this right, this is the idea that in the poet Lee Man-yeol, which actually reflected in the author's life, because after the Korean War, the people in the South that were communist defected to North Korea. This was Lee Man-yeol's father was a defector. So this is, the idea of being a traitor in your own country, and something that he had to, I suppose, live with. So this is another thing. The idea of this, I suppose, the idea of disconnectedness also comes with the fact that disconnected with your own people. I mean, the fact that the half of the countries, you've got these people who are ethnically the same, but also very, very different, which is
growing ever more so.
Yeah, I read somewhere that the North Korea has gone from a while back to being sort of neighbours towards more the enemy, and there are these programs to reunite the families that split. But it's going more so. I mean, who knows where it's going in the future? I've heard news in the Guardian the other day that Russia is actually sort of befriending North Korea more and more. It's sort of in China, so who knows where that would go. But,
how has it differed? How does it differ getting into Korean culture through its literature versus, say, getting into French culture through French literature?
I think one difference is that I really didn't know anything about Korean literature before I read these books. As I understand it, the influence of before the Western influence, which was the beginning of the 20th century, Korean literature was influenced by in the past of Chinese literature, so sort of Confucian tales and poetry and philosophy. So you'd get these books where people could go on and on and on, not really speaking in a realistic manner, which is sort of relatively recent, or recent about 100 years. And I suppose in French literature, I mean, I read Zola and Flaubert and people at school. We're much more familiar with those writers than these ones. The other thing is that something which is in the poet at the end, and also the vegetarian, the Han Kang book, is this idea which I think is a bit more difficult for Western people to understand is more of the idea of this kind of the influences of Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, of becoming one with nature. Something that the vegetarian, I think, author said that her favourite quotes from a poet said that we should all be plants. And this idea at the end of the poet where he's really, the ultimate goal of the poet is to become one with nature. Now, of course, we say things like that, you know. We like to think, we like to kind of cherry pick with Buddhism and Eastern philosophy and say, yeah, I want to be at one with nature, which means sort of go for a picnic or something.
Lip service paid, yes.
Yeah. I think we sort of think of going up to the mountains occasionally. But this is something which I think is difficult to get round. And difficult to get round the fact that, again, the books are pretty melancholy. They're pretty... Again, they don't end in a particularly triumphant way. But that is sort of certainly an inward-looking or striving sort of inward piece, which, again, is something which I don't really see... in a lot of Western literature.
Have you been able to draw an influence from Korean literature for use in your own writing?
That's a good question. I think one thing is that they don't really have a strict line between literary, what we would call literary fiction, or literature, high literature, if you like, and genre fiction. You can see that in the movies. You can see that in...
It's all to the good, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, one writer who I really like, Bae Suah, this book, Time in Grey, you can get in a bilingual edition, the modern Korean literature. So this is more... I would say this is a book, or her writing is certainly influenced by European literature, because she actually went over and studied in Germany. So though you've got a writer like her, which is certainly influenced by Western ideas, at the same time there's other books where there's a mix of styles. There's a mix of styles which I like, which I kind of think perhaps it's changing, but you do have it's really strict division between fantasy, horror, thriller, crime, and more proper literary books, which I'm certainly interested in breaking down that barrier, and that's one of the things I've lived by. I think also that they're all different styles. One of my favourite books I've read recently is this book, At Least We Can Apologize. It's written by Lee Ki-ho, translated by Christopher Dicas, and this is from the Dalkey Archive, the Library of Korean Literature. This is a real surreal book. You've got a couple of guys who are interned in this place called the Institution. There are these characters called the caretakers who sort of beat them mercilessly. And then they start up this project which is apologizing to people for other people's wrongs. So they got this idea that this will make them some money, and this is something they need to do. So they go around and getting quite trivial stuff. I think it's the butcher and the grocers, and they say to these two characters that one of them's been using the shared bathroom in an inappropriate way, and my favourite one is that hitting the shuttlecock too high when playing badminton. So the idea is you apologise on the behalf of the other person, and hopefully the conflict is resolved. But of course this gets more and more out of hand, because someone contacts them and says he's been estranged from his wife. So he wants them to go along and say to his wife, really sorry about, clearing off, leaving you with a kid. So they turn up to this woman's restaurant, and she says, well, I'm not, pretty much says, well, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in an apology from this guy. So moved on. So that they kind of start panicking about what to do. And it's really... really original style. It's really, this was funny, but very, very sort of abstract. I mean, it's recognizable things in Korea, people drinking beer and soju and all that, but it's a completely different style to the others. I mean, you've got this, My Son's Girlfriend, I say, is what you'd say pretty, what you call realistic. I mean, that's, I believe there's a genre called the Gangnam novella, which is sort of, this is the class thing, and everyday lives sort of often not sort of working out, or not being people struggling on, people being okay. But,
even beyond the style of Korean literature, do you see Korea itself as a viable subject for your own writing going forward?
The problem with something like Paris or any well-known city is as soon as you start writing about it, you're in competition with some of the greatest writers ever. I mean,
forget it.
The problem is, as soon as I start writing anything that involves Paris, I just feel like, I haven't said this before. So the answer to the question is yes. Hopefully I kind of get in here. People, you do. I suppose there is a freedom. People don't know so much about the place where you're living, but at the same time there's a danger of just the going on about crazy cultural differences, or and that, I don't think that's particularly interesting at all. I mean, you could just get that from any blog now, and I suppose this is the question of also how well can you really get to know a place, and of course if you learn the language and live somewhere for a long time, you can get to know it pretty well, but you're never going to get to know the culture because you're never going to get beyond your own prejudices, your own thoughts, your own history. So yeah, with some trepidation, it's always a question of how. I mean, things tend to sort of seep in. I won't specifically say I'm going to write a story about teaching this particular sort of executive from Samsung or something, but other ideas sort of tend to creep in, and I think one thing is that mix of styles that that a lot of literature has. So, I would hope. I mean, if I'm not getting anything out of it, then what am I doing here, I suppose?
Do you think there's some aspect of your own experience in Korea so far that you felt but have not seen explored by others, whether it's from bloggers to novelists to anybody? Your own experience as an outsider here, is there something that you sense hasn't been really plumbed literarily?
That's a really good question. I suppose a lot of the experiences is reasonably similar. Is that a lot of people come here for a year or so. Everything is pretty much set up. They stay here for a year. They make a bit of money and they go home.
So no Korean in the process, of course.
I think what is it particularly about me? I suppose it's a combination of things, really. I suppose it's a combination of marrying a Korean national. I suppose the one thing is actually having a child, a very young daughter here, who's obviously, mixed race, and is going to the local nursery and seeing that happen. I mean, that's something which isn't, what most people come here are pretty young. They're pretty in their early 20s. So you don't I get to meet a lot of people with kids. And I think that's something which is interesting. As someone said recently, my wife's father said that your daughter speaks more Korean than you do.
Oh dear.
Which something I'll probably have to work on.
You have a competition now.
Yeah, I think I might do a language exchange with my daughter. She's 2.5, so I sort of chat to her about what she's been getting up to in the nursery.
Yes.
I think that's maybe the one thing, and that's really interesting thing. I mean, to see that happening, and
you have a life established here in Korea, unlike many.
Yeah. I mean, that thing, I think the day-to-day work is pretty much like what everybody, goes into. I think the other thing is I pretty much live out in the sticks. A lot of people here, they head for the expatriate area, which is Itaewon. Nothing wrong with that, it's fine. I mean, it just hasn't happened that we're living there. So it is a situation where I'm right up in the suburbs and pretty, as I said before, still pretty unusual that there are Western people out there, So that's quite different as well, I think. The other thing, I suppose, is that, just kind of the expatriate experience is that you meet. It's pretty easy to meet people, but because you have this immediate thing in common, which is you're not Korean.
외국 사람.
Yeah, this is it, and that is great because you can just sort of meet up with someone and you can start to kind of the typical thing to do is sort of complaining, or I suppose
danger. The expat pitching sessions.
But also the other thing is just that you immediately have something in common, so you can pretty much get these relationships, or friendships going. It isn't too difficult at all. So that, which is something you can't really do in your own country. You don't go to sort of people in England and say, "Hey, I'm from England."
You too? Oh.
Yeah, wow. Let's go for a beer.
You'd have to have already had quite a few beers before that exchange would happen.
Yeah, an Australian cousin said he had that once in England. Some guy came out to him and said, "Oh, you're Australian too," and he wanted to run a mile. So that's one thing. I suppose, I suppose a lot of the things are pretty similar. Again, you like to think that your experience is a bit different, but a lot of the experience of the expatriate is pretty much the same. I mean, it's not that difficult to set up here. You don't pay a lot of tax. Pretty much people leave you alone. Not too much bureaucracy, and you're up and running, and you don't really get that much bother at all, and certainly walking around. So it's a relatively safe city as well, for its size and the amount of people here. So that's not a problem.
It's not the kind of struggle Koreans themselves write about having.
No, it's interesting to read again the class thing, the class divide, which is something you don't really get an impression of. It's great to read some female authors as well here to get their perspective. The vegetarian book that's coming out soon, although it's ostensibly about a woman who refuses to eat meat, it's interesting to see the response of the family. Certainly, the father is. It's quite violent scenes in the book. It's quite a hard book to read in itself, and it's interesting to see that. But of course, it's a woman doing something different. It's pretty. It's not. I mean, I really like the book because it's not some sort of tedious explanation of how we should all stop eating meat and blah blah blah. I mean, she actually stops eating meat because it's in a dream. She sees a face in a dream. It's much more than simply becoming someone who stops eating red meat and still has a sort of a tuna sandwich. But it's certainly about someone who's being different, and certainly it's no mistake that the main character is a woman, which is still very patriarchal society here, and you see that. I mean, even it's not that much better in most countries, but they're getting a lot of work and it's a really male-dominated environment, without question. I think. I mean, of course, that's changing, and people realize that. A lot of the classic, I think, Korean drama plotline at the moment is sort of the woman becoming the manager, or the woman earning more than the husband. So that's the classic kind of tale of conflict there. But no, it's great to read some female authors. This Baiswa is she's actually got a Deborah Smith, who translated the Vegetarian, who's been really helpful in suggesting some books, and really recommended reading some of her essays on Korean literature on the internet. She's actually translated a forthcoming book called The Essayist's Desk, which hasn't actually, this is by Baiswa, hasn't actually found a publisher yet. So I really hope that gets published. That is really interesting to read, in the sense that that is something where the narrator goes abroad to study in Germany. She's studying German and has this incredibly strict teacher, I think, called M, and she's learning German, and she starts off by even in the basic classes, by learning German literature. She has to be German literature. So there's a moment when she goes shopping, and she doesn't even know, she goes to buy something. She doesn't even know the basic words to buy stuff from the house, but she's familiar with sort of lines from hardcore German literature. And one of the reasons apparently is for her doing this is to say that she wants her to learn these, if I understand it correctly, her to learn these hard and fast sort of ideas or ideals that go across cultural barriers. So if you learn these great truths from German literature, German poetry, then you'll leap across the cultural barrier. And as the narrator says, well, this isn't true. I mean, you can't really just learn that. You can't get away from the fact that you're not.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. And I suppose going back to your question about what I'm learning here. I mean, I suppose one thing you learn is that you just can't know everything. I mean, now we get this this society where there's sort of this Wikipedia knowledge, this bits and pieces. We like to know we know a little bit about this and a little bit that. And it's well, we don't really. We know a little bit about a lot, but it's the we pick up things and jump onto the internet and get something from here, get something from there. So that's another thing there. I think it's almost like kind of should be a bit how do you say fortifying to say that you can't really get to know all this stuff. It's just not possible. You can't mean, particularly coming from a place, well, Britain and United States, have dominated the whole world for a couple of 100 years. I mean, suddenly to go from that and somehow imagine what the culture here, the history here, is possible to do that. It's
That's a good assumption. You just take that assumption that it's impossible. Assume the impossibility. And go from there.
Yeah. I mean, why not? Why not? It is. Again, something where you've got these blogs, you've got social media. So you're picking up a lot of things. You're picking up a lot of things about different cultures now. People travel much more, and one of the things I did get from the literature is like, well, why not read the literature? I mean, why not go to those people? I mean, I'm not saying that they, necessarily hold all the truths that journalists don't or other people don't, but that they're putting the hours in to actually think about the stuff and making it compelling and interesting, and the way they use the language. And that was it's been really rewarding reading this stuff. The stuff I read in these books I didn't have any idea about, really. I mean, or certainly wasn't familiar with. Not just the history. I mean, I certainly think that the Gast Hwang Suk Kyung is a really good book to read if you want a lot of the history. The other ones are more contemporary. And going back to the Kim Young-ha, there's actually a lot of stuff I recognised in that. One thing is what they call the bullet taxes. The younger brother, they're called C and K. There's a tendency, I don't know where it comes from actually, to call a lot of the characters by an initial. You've got C and K in this one. You've got M in the Beisuwa. I think in the vegetarian there's also a couple of people who are called by letters. I don't. Yeah, and in this book, the younger brother drives a taxi, and he drives incredibly fast because he wants to sort of achieve this almost dreamlike sense of getting away from yourself, which is. And I actually took a taxi from Itaewon about a month back with some friends, and we went from Itaewon back home, which is. It's quite a way. I mean, it takes about an hour plus on the underground system, and I've never been in a taxi driven so fast. It's
a real thing. These taxis.
It really is quick. They really, particularly when they go down the suburbs. It's really, really fast. And this is what I started reading this book, and I thought, hey, I'm actually kind of, almost like. Recognizing something in the Korean author's talking about. And I haven't noticed, I think I did notice the other day, I don't know if you noticed the taxi drivers in Seoul, they watch TV as they drive as well. I imagine driving in a London black cab in the States, guys watching TV. And the driving here is crazy. I mean, it's not just the roads. They will go onto the pavement and just suddenly driving around on the pavement, and the motorbikes are everywhere as well. So there's really, again, that sort of really fast, going back to that sort of fast-paced thing. That's certainly a thing. Yeah.
And listeners, you have recommendations. So if you experience or want to experience, say, a bullet taxi, of one book you can read to get your mind into that cultural space, and many others as well. From this conversation I've been having in Gangnam with Laurence Pritchard. He is a writer, a teacher, a sometime actor, and overall Yongguk Shinsa. Laurence, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Colin. Thanks a lot.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chinupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennessy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir,
Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.